Today's video is sponsored by Delete Me. The F-14 fighter, one of the most well-known fighter aircraft of the 70s and 80s Cold War period, was also the last major analog fighter to be made by the US, and building upon the experience gained in Vietnam from the use of the F-4 Phantoms and its direct predecessor, the F-111. Although it's generally seen as a great aircraft, it didn't have the fighting experience or the number of kills that you would expect for an aircraft of its type and reputation. Well, not in the US at least, with only 5 kills to its name over its entire US Navy service life. In fact, the only other country to buy the F-14, Iran, back in the day of the Shah before the Iranian Revolution, has about 15 to 30 times the number of kills attributed to their F-14s during the Iran-Iraq War, depending upon the source you read. The F-14 was also one of the main players in the 1986 film Top Gun, starring Tom Cruise and Kelly McGillis, which helped its reputation with the public no end, though the pilots and maintenance crews knew the truth a little bit better. And the truth was that, like many military aircraft, things weren't all that rosy in real life. Early F-14s gained a bit of a bad reputation because of the TF-30 engines, and even after it was fixed, it was still seen by some as a difficult aircraft to fly low and slow, especially for carrier takeoff and landings. Ironic, because it was designed specifically for carrier use, and in all there were 30 fatal accidents involving the F-14. So what do I mean when I say it was the last analog fighter? Well, the F-14 was designed from 1968 to 1970, just before the advent of modern digital electronics, which meant that things like fly-by-wire, digital radar, avionics, data processing and weapons guidance were either not available or much less capable of an aircraft of just a few years down the line, like the F-16 Fighting Falcon. But things didn't stand still, and as new digital technology became available in the 1970s, 80s and beyond, it would be adapted to the F-14, but the overall design was still that of the late 60s. Some would say that the F-14 was a 3.5 generation aircraft, while others would say it was a very early 4th generation aircraft. While it had many of the advanced features, it was still a product of its time and a replacement for the much hated F-111B, which the Navy felt had foisted upon it by the Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara as a combined service aircraft with the Air Force to cut costs. But as far as the Navy were concerned, it was a disaster because it was too big and heavy to meet their demands. So after much political wrangling, they had Congress kill off the Navy F-111B version. These days, it seems that almost everywhere you go, some website, company or app wants information from you. I have to fill out a form with my name, email, phone number and car registration just to take the rubbish to the local council dump. Not once, but every time I go. But what happens to all this data? They say it's for internal use only, but data that identifies individuals is worth money, and that's often a lure that is too tempting. So it ends up in the hands of data brokers, companies that buy and sell data to anyone who wants it. Data can include emails, names, current and past addresses, age, phone numbers, occupations, passport numbers and photos, driving license info, and more. This is not just annoying, it's a breach of privacy, and if your job is in places like the government, the military, civil services, or you have a high profile, it can be a security risk. You can request that these companies delete the data they hold on you, but with over 750 data brokers around the world, all buying and selling personal data, where do you start? And this is where Delete Me comes in. Delete Me has been helping normal people like you and I get their personal information removed from data brokers since 2010, covering the US, UK and Europe. Delete Me is simple to use. You just select the plan you want, fill in the online application, and Delete Me will contact the hundreds of data brokers to remove you from their lists. You receive regular privacy reports that show how much data was found, where it was found, and where it was removed. You can do this for yourself or your family, and if you use the joindeleteme.com/droid link in the description below today, you'll get a 20% discount. So, if you value your privacy, check them out. Although General Dynamics was the prime contractor for the F-111, they also brought on board Grumman because of their greater experience of building carrier aircraft. So when the B version was killed off by the Navy, they went to Grumman to have an aircraft designed for their needs without the compromises of having to share it with the Air Force. The root of all these problems came down to missiles, and primarily the anti-ship missiles carried by long-range Soviet bombers, which could be capable of knocking out even the largest US carriers if they could get through their carrier air defences. The best way to do this was to have aircraft capable of keeping these Soviet bombers at long distances away from the fleet carrier groups. This will be known as the Fleet Air Defence. In the late 1950s, McDonnell Douglas created the F-4 Phantom II for the US Navy to carry out the role of FAD. Designed as a long-range supersonic jet interceptor primarily with air-to-air missiles, it was so successful that it was soon adopted by the US Air Force and Marines as a fighter bomber for air-to-ground attacks and became the most prominent US Cold War aircraft, with 5,195 built from 1958 to 1981. But then someone realized that if you could have a missile that could shoot down another missile, then it would be even better. Hughes Aircraft came up with a solution, the AIM-54 Pheonix, a large radar-guided beyond visual range air-to-air missile capable of shooting down the Soviet anti-ship missiles at a range of up to 50 miles or 80 kilometers. This, however, would not be used with the F-4 Phantom, but its replacement, General Dynamics F-111. During the early 1960s, the new Secretary of Defense, Robert McNamara, wanted to streamline production of aircraft and reduce the development costs and combine the roles of a fighter, bomber, and interceptor into a new multi-role aircraft for the US and the US Navy with the TFX program, which would go on to become the F-111. Although the F-111 was a multi-service aircraft, it was heavily influenced by the Air Force, which for them was primarily a fighter-bomber, while the Navy really needed an interceptor fighter. A modified B version was made for the Navy with a shorter nose cone, heavy-duty landing gear, and folding wingtips. But this left the Navy feeling as though it was an afterthought. It was too heavy for carrier use, it wasn't a true fighter, and it lacked the maneuverability and overall performance that the Navy expected. Grumman saw that the Navy F-111B project was not going to make it, so in 1966 they started work on their own design called the 303, with the sole purpose of having the Navy demands in mind and creating an aircraft that would be a cutting-edge design for the next decade or more. They took features from the F-111, the two-seat design, but changed it from a side-by-side to a tandem setup. A modified swing wing was made fully automated, and they also took the dual TF-30 engines for high performance, though they would be later replaced with the General Electric F-110 in the F-14A+, the F-14B, and the F-14D Super Tomcat. The twin tailplane was added for extra stability in case of a single-engine failure, and an extra strong box frame holding the swing wings and the engines was also created. It would have a top speed of Mach 2.34, flight ceiling of 50,000 feet, and a range of over 500 nautical miles or 926 kilometers. They also designed the F-14 to use the widest range of weapons available, with an M61 Vulcan rotary cannon for close-in dogfighting, the Sidewinder and Sparrow missiles for medium distance of up to 15 miles, and the Pheonix for long distance of 50 miles or 80 kilometers, and targeting of up to 6 targets at once. The AWG-9 radar could track up to 24 targets at a detection range of up to 150 miles or 185 kilometers. In a now famous 6-on-6 weapons test, an F-14 fired 6 Pheonix missiles at 6 separate targets, with 5 of the missiles scoring direct hits. It was the most expensive single test of missile technology ever done at the time, but it proved Grumman and Hughes' claim that a single F-14 could take on and destroy up to 6 targets at once. although it was smaller than the F-111, because of a requirement to carry up to 6 Pheonix missiles together with a large AWG-9 radar, it would still be the largest US fighter to fly from an aircraft carrier. The contract was awarded just before the new Nixon administration took over in 1969. Grumman took the unusual step of testing several airframes to destruction in a factory to find any issues, and then going straight into production rather than producing prototypes, so as to save time and avoiding potential cancellation by the new administration. This way of working closely with the Navy built up the ability to produce updates and special modifications in sometimes days instead of the usual weeks, months, or years. However, problems started with the very first production F-14 built on its second ever test flight, as it suffered not one but 2 hydraulic failures as it was coming into land. The pilot managed to maintain control till they were just 8 meters above the trees on the landing approach, when the crew then ejected. The aircraft then tipped down and crashed into the trees, but both crew escaped with only minor injuries. The fault was found out to be caused by the use of a new and novel method of joins and titanium pipework for the very powerful hydraulic system to power the swing wings. In a fluke event, the exact frequency matching of the vibrations of the engines and that of the hydraulic pumps set up resonances in the pipework, which then broke. And because the dual system was a mirror of the other, the secondary system also then failed. This was a bit of a blessing in disguise and would create a new rule for aviation in general, in that primary and backup systems must not be mounted identically. Having learned the lessons, the Navy ordered the removal of the titanium hydraulic lines, and testing continued and proved that the F-14 could out-accelerate, out-turn, and had considerably better weapons systems than the F-4 Phantom. But the biggest problems with the early F-14s was the Pratt & Whitney TF-30 engines. John Lehman, Secretary of the Navy, said that it was probably the worst engine airframe mismatch we've had in years, and that 28% of all the F-14 accidents were due to engine issues. It could suffer from compressor stall at high angles of attack and rapid throttle changes at over 30,000 feet, and at some altitudes, even the exhaust from a missile launch could induce a compressor stall. It also suffered from a high number of turbine failures, which necessitated the reinforcement of the engine bay so as not to cause damage to other systems. By July 1984, the F-14As started to be upgraded to the F-14A Pluses, when the TF-30s were replaced by the General Electric F-110 engines. The F-14B and F-14D Super Tomcat would also have the new engines, with 23,400 pounds of thrust each, giving them a total of over 54,000 pounds of thrust. This not only increased reliability, also reduced fuel consumption, increasing its range by up to 60% or 30% more loiter time. Its performance was also considerably better, and the rate of climb increased by 61%, and it was powerful enough to perform carrier launches without the afterburner, and it increased its much-famed dogfighting capabilities. The first combat kills for the F-14 came in 1981, when Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi sent 2 Sukhoi Su-22s to intercept a couple of F-14s in the Gulf of Sidra off the coast of Libya. Both of the Su-22s were shot down after the Tomcats were given permission to return fire. Then in 1989, F-14s shot down 2 Libyan MiG-M23s, again over the Gulf of Sidra. And in 1991, during Operation Desert Storm, an F-14 made the last kill in US service when an Mi-8 helicopter was shot down with an AIM-9 Sidewinder. And that is the total operational number of aircraft shot down by the F-14 whilst in service with the US. Some would say that its reputation preceded it and no one wanted to take it on, which is true in some respects, but the Pheonix missile kept most of the potential enemies at bay. Iraqi fighters would turn around once the powerful AWG-9 lit them up as a potential target, knowing that if they got any closer, the chances are they would never see the F-14 that fired the Pheonix missile at them. With the F-14D Super Tomcat, the radar system was updated and jamming systems as well as infrared search and tracking detectors and cameras were fitted to help visually identify and track aircraft from up to 60 miles or 97 kilometers away for large aircraft. By 1995, the Lantern pod upgrade gave the F-14s the ability of forward-looking infrared for nighttime operations and to use and direct laser-guided bombs, allowing it to become a bomber for the first time. With its new capabilities, it was used extensively during the Kosovo War of 1998-99, when the Tomcat fighter became a Bombcat air-to-ground bomber, something which many of the crews didn't like, preferring it to be a true fighter rather than a fighter bomber. But in the end, time and technology was catching up with the F-14. The swing wing technology and the exposed engine inlets made it very unstealthy, just as the latest aircraft like the Lockheed F-117, Nighthawk and the Northrop B-2 Spirit were becoming almost invisible to radar, something which the 1960s design F-14s could never do. The Tomcats were also expensive aircraft to maintain, and sooner or later, new, more capable and more efficient aircraft like the F-35 would be on the horizon, and the F-14's days were numbered. In 2006, some 15 years after production had stopped, the Navy withdrew the F-14s from service. The F-14s had been in production from 1969 to 1991, with a total of 712 being built, with the expectation that they will be in fleet service until 2015. However, Iran still had about 60 out of the 79 F-14s which were delivered just before the Iranian Revolution deposed the Shah. During the Iran-Iraq War, they claimed 160 shoot-downs for the loss of 16 Tomcats, which included 7 accidents, but research tends to put that number at around about 55 confirmed kills. So the US was very keen to make sure that spares and parts which had been withheld from the Iranians did not find their way from the now out-of-service F-14s. In 2007, the remaining American F-14s that weren't in museums or on display were shredded to make sure that the parts could not make their way back to Iran. Although this was not totally successful, as Iran managed to gain a significant stock of spares, but didn't get anything from the aircraft weapons system. So they made a short-term gain, but the number of operational aircraft available to the Iranians still remains low, and the weapons available to them is also low if you consider the Russian adaptive missiles which they fitted to some of them. The F-14 Tomcat was an icon of the Cold War, and although it had a very low number of kills for the US Navy, it still carried a massive reputation which preceded it wherever it went. So in a way, it did its job without having to do its job. And to many of the crews which flew it, it's still one of the best fighter aircraft ever built. So thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed the video, then please thumbs up, share and subscribe. And a big thank you goes to all of our patrons for their ongoing support.